On my birthday, my boyfriend announced his wedding date with another woman in front of the entire company. I didn't cry or cause a scene. Instead, I quietly sought him out, desperate for an explanation. But what I stumbled upon was far worse than I could have imagined. I overheard him talking to one of his friends in the hallway. "Aren't you worried Lenore will be upset about this?" the friend asked cautiously. Daniel sighed, his tone matter of fact. "What choice do I have? If I don't marry Grace, her family will force her to marry some stranger. I can't let that happen." The friend hesitated but pressed on. "But Lenore, she's been with you for years. Doesn't that matter?" Daniel chuckled lightly, a sound that used to comfort me but now felt like a slap to the face. "Lenore's been mine for 8 years. Everyone knows that. What choice does she have but to wait for me?" Each word hit like a dagger to my chest. 8 years. 8 years of love, patience, and unwavering support, and this was how he saw me? As someone with no other option? Later, my family arranged for me to meet someone they thought would be a more suitable match. A man from the well-known Cortez family. The day I was to marry this stranger was the same day Daniel married Grace. As Daniel's wedding day approached, he couldn't shake a sense of unease. Something felt wrong. He warned his groomsmen to keep an eye out, worried I might crash the ceremony. One of them hesitated before speaking. "You haven't heard? Lenore's getting married today, too." "Mom, does the Cortez family's proposal still stand?" I asked over lunch. My mom froze, her hand trembling slightly as she held her teacup. Her wide eyes locked on mine. "Why are you asking about that?" Her concern was written all over her face. Just hours earlier, a video of Daniel proposing to Grace had gone viral, dominating every social media platform. The public was abuzz with the news of the upcoming wedding of the Rollins family's sole heir. But the bride wasn't me, the woman who had stood by his side for 8 years. "Lenore," my mom said again, her tone firmer now. "Marriage isn't something you should rush into. I don't want you to decide this because your impulsive mind kicks in." I swallowed the lump in my throat and shook my head. "I'm not being impulsive, Mom. You didn't reject the Cortez family's proposal immediately, which means you think Frederick is a better choice than Daniel. I trust your judgment." She sighed deeply, placing her hands on the table. "Frederick Cortez is indeed a good man, but marriage is a lifetime commitment. Don't you think you should meet him first? Take some time to get to know him?" "I'll skip that part," I said firmly. "You can handle the arrangements. I'll go along with whatever you think is best." We discussed the details over lunch, and afterward, I returned to the small apartment I'd bought for myself. What I didn't expect was to find Daniel there. The sound of the door opening caught his attention. He closed his laptop and looked up at me as if everything were perfectly normal. "Busy day at work? You're home late." I slipped off my shoes, my mind racing. "Why are you here?" "I had a business dinner nearby," he said casually, standing up and walking toward me as he always did. "Thought I'd stop by to check on you." As he got closer, a familiar floral scent hit me. Grace's perfume. Revulsion churned in my stomach. I instinctively took a step back, dodging his outstretched arms, while a sting crept into my eyes and nose. "What's wrong?" he asked lightly, as if unaware of what he'd done. "Nothing," I replied stiffly. "Well, you've seen me, alive and breathing. You can go now." His smile faltered, but he quickly recovered with a soft laugh. "Last week, you were upset because I hadn't been spending more time with you. Now I've cleared my schedule just to be with you, and you won't come near me? Come on, Lenore, don't do this." I squinted as my memory replayed the events of yesterday. Yesterday was my birthday, and I waited all day, from the moment the sun rose until it set, hoping to hear from him. But not a single call or text came. By nightfall, the silence had become unbearable, and I decided to go look for him. Before I could, though, a message popped up on my phone, a video from an unfamiliar number. Curiosity turned into dread as I played it. The video showed Daniel standing in the center of his office, proposing to Grace Solis in front of their colleagues. The room was filled with cheers and laughter. I couldn't believe my eyes. My mind raced, searching for some explanation, any reason that could make this make sense. Desperation carried me to his company, determined to hear the truth from him directly. But instead of finding answers, I stumbled upon his conversation with his friend. Lenore's been mine for 8 years. Everyone knows that. What choice does she have but to wait for me? I had waited. For 8 long years, I'd waited for a man who never truly saw me. Every word I overheard was a dagger, shattering the remnants of the trust I had so stubbornly clung to. It was in that moment I realized what I had become, a fool, holding on to a love that was never mine to begin with. Thinking back to his words, to the laughter in that video, the pain in my chest was overwhelming, leaving me gasping for air. I had been a joke all along. I looked up at the man in front of me, his gentle features softening under the dim light. My vision blurred as tears welled up in my eyes, threatening to spill over. I didn't understand why, but my chest felt tight, as though the air had been sucked out of the room. The ache was unbearable. When Daniel saw my tears fall, he panicked. He fumbled to wipe them away, his movements clumsy and unpracticed. "Why are you crying? Did someone mess with you? Tell me the name and I'll take care of them," he said with a mix of urgency and concern. Since childhood, Daniel had been the neighborhood bully. He was undisciplined and mischievous, always getting into trouble, and his mother often chased after him, scolding or even beating him. In contrast, I had always been the frail one. Born prematurely, I grew up under the constant watchful eyes of my parents. They wouldn't let me play outside with the other kids. I could only sit by the window, watching them run and laugh, longing to join. Every time Daniel saw me sitting by the window while he played chase with the other kids, he'd sneak over, slipping me a handful of treats. He'd pinch my soft cheeks with a mischievous smile and whisper, "When can you come out and play with me?" As I grew older, my health improved, and by middle school, my parents finally relented and let me venture outside. Daniel was overjoyed. He was treating me as though I were made of glass. "Lenore," he'd tell me solemnly, "if anyone dares to mess with you, just tell them my name. They won't dare touch you." From then on, I was never alone. Daniel was always by my side, taking me wherever I wanted to go. If anyone so much as looked at me the wrong way, he'd show up like a storm, ready to shield me. He was my safe haven, my unshakable protector. When we entered college, it felt natural for us to take the next step and become a couple. He grew even more attentive, showering me with a love so sweet and devoted, it made me believe in forever. Then Grace entered the picture. She was everything I wasn't. Brilliant, beautiful, and confident. She had a way of carrying herself that drew people in. She and Daniel were in the same major, sharing a connection I couldn't understand. At first, Daniel tried to include me, translating their technical jargon so I wouldn't feel left out. But eventually, he grew impatient. "You won't get it anyway," he said one day, brushing me off. "Just go do your own thing." From that moment, their conversations deepened, ranging from class discussions to late-night chats online. They became inseparable, their connection undeniable. Meanwhile, the bond between Daniel and me began to strain. We grew more distant and our conversations became increasingly rare, reduced to nothing more than good night and casual greetings. Friends tried to warn me, urging me to keep an eye on their growing closeness, but I waved them off. I told myself that even in a relationship, people deserved privacy. I trusted him. I trusted us. But trust, I learned, could be a cruel teacher. That night, Daniel insisted on staying, claiming he couldn't leave me alone in such a state. His words were smooth, his tone carefully measured, but they rang hollow, like lines recited from a poorly rehearsed play. I stood there, studying him. After a long silence, I finally muttered, "Do whatever suits you." Without waiting for his response, I turned and walked toward my bedroom. His footsteps followed closely behind, but as he tried to step inside, I shut the door firmly in his face and turned the lock. "Lenore?" His voice came through the door, soft yet insistent. "I'll be right outside. When you're ready to talk, just come and find me, okay?" There was no anger in his words, no trace of the frustration I expected. That only made it worse. I ignored him and hot tears rolled down my cheeks, dripping onto the backs of my cold hands. The sharp contrast burned like an unrelenting reminder of the turmoil inside me. I sank onto the edge of the bed, wrapping my arms tightly around myself as if to hold the pieces of me together. "Daniel, I don't want to love you anymore." The thought whispered through my mind like a quiet plea, both freeing and suffocating at the same time. The next morning, I woke up groggy and disoriented, the weight of the previous night still pressing down on me. I rubbed my temples, trying to ease the dull ache spreading across my skull before dragging myself out of bed. As I stepped into the living room, I caught sight of Daniel hurriedly pulling on his jacket. "Lenore, I have something urgent to deal with," he said, his tone brisk. "I'll come back tonight to pick you up. Let's go out for dinner, okay?" Before I could respond, he was already halfway out the door. By the time I blinked, he was gone. I let out a slow breath, my eyes drifting to the sofa where he had spent the night. Something glinted on the cushions. His phone. He must have left in such a rush that he forgot it. Picking it up, I hesitated. I thought about calling him later to return it, but before I could decide, the screen lit up with a notification. Daniel hadn't set a password on his phone, and the message popped up clearly on the screen. What I saw made my stomach churn. My hands tightened around the phone as I stared at the message, my heart pounding in my chest. The message came from someone saved in the phone as Little Fool Pig. The photo showed Grace sitting in a hospital emergency room, looking disheveled but still smiling at the camera, flashing a peace sign. Her caption read, "Take your time on the way here. Drive safely. I'll be waiting for you." That was when I realized I let out a self-deprecating smile. So that was the reason Daniel out in a haste. I called a local courier service to have his phone sent to his office. Afterward, I went straight to work. Since graduating, I'd been working at the McLaughlin family business. My father wanted to toughen me up, so he made me start at the very bottom as an entry-level employee. Years of hard work and proving myself paid off. I was now the department manager, a position I had earned through my own abilities. As soon as I arrived at the office, my assistant walked up to me, handed me a file. "Good morning, ma'am. Here's a document that needs your approval. All the processes are complete. We just need your signature to finalize it." I took the file and scanned its contents. It was a collaboration with the Rollins Group. Yet, for some reason, I couldn't recall ever hearing about this project. "Is everything all right, ma'am? Should we go ahead?" my assistant asked, noticing my hesitation. "No." My response was sharp and immediate, causing her to look startled, but she quickly recovered her composure and hesitated before adding, "Didn't you say that unless it's a very important collaboration, the first choice should always be the Rollins Group?" I had indeed given such instructions, back when I was still naively optimistic about my future with Daniel. At the time, I thought our families would eventually unite, and whether his company earned more or mine did hardly seem to matter. I trusted him so completely that I didn't bother scrutinizing projects that involved the Rollins Group. "Let's pass on this one, but from now on, we'll make sure to choose the best option. The company's interests come first," I said as I signed the document. The workday flew by, and when I finally finished, I was starving. I had planned to try the new restaurant that had just opened in town, but when I arrived, I found it packed with people. Just as I was about to leave, I heard a familiar voice calling me. Ms. McLaughlin, over here. I turned around to find Grace and Daniel sitting at a table, beaming up at me. It's so nice to see you. Here for their specials, too? Grace leaned forward, her excitement unmasked. Daniel froze for a moment when he saw me, but quickly recovered. I was just about to call you and invite you to join us for dinner. What a coincidence that you also came here. This place is packed. Come sit with us, he said, gesturing for the waiter to bring an extra set of utensils. I hadn't eaten much at lunch, and now my stomach was rumbling. I figured I might as well stay and join them. Ms. McLaughlin, I remember you like spicy food, Grace chimed in. Let me order some for you. I glanced at the table. Everything was light and mild, totally not what Daniel and I usually went for. We both loved spicy food. He had once told me that dishes without chili were like lifeless meals. Without spice, it was as if the food had no soul. Of course, Daniel didn't bat an eye as the fresh meal spread in front of him. Hold on now. I think we both know who's gonna eat the spicy dish, Daniel said with a teasing grin. He shot Grace a displeased look. Grace, didn't you hear the doctor? You need to lay off the spice and stick to lighter food. Grace rolled her eyes playfully. All right, Mr. Nagging. I won't order it, geez. Happy now? Watching them bicker, my heart, already battered, didn't even twitch. It was numb to it all now. He sighed and shook his head. You guys go ahead. I need to make a quick call. As soon as Daniel walked away, Grace's smile faded and she shot me a look filled with challenge. So, Lenore, right? I have to admit I'm impressed, she said, her voice laced with scorn. You know Daniel just proposed to me, yet here you are, still clinging to him. You sure have some nerve. I heard the contempt in her words, but I didn't flinch. Looking up at her, I replied, Is stealing someone's boyfriend something to be proud of? Do you think it's worth flaunting in front of everyone? You? She started, her mouth opening in surprise, but before she could finish, a thick cloud of smoke suddenly wafted from the kitchen. Fire! Someone in the restaurant shouted their lungs out. The moment the words rang out, the restaurant descended into chaos. People scrambled to get out, their faces pale with fear as they pushed and shoved, trying to escape the danger. I quickly snapped out of my stupor and stood up, trying to make my way toward the exit. But before I could take a single step, a figure collided into me, hard. Before I could even steady myself, I heard a familiar, frantic voice call out, Grace, don't worry, I'll get you out of here. Daniel didn't miss a step as he rushed to guide Grace out of the restaurant. His heart raced, flooded with relief, and in a moment of overwhelming emotion, he hugged her tightly. Are you okay? Did you hurt? No, thank God, he murmured, his voice thick with gratitude. Then suddenly, something seemed to hit him. He turned back, his eyes landing on me, standing nearby, watching them in silence. His voice faltered, nearly choking as he stammered, Lenore, I was just in a hurry. It wasn't that I didn't want to help you. I know, I interrupted coldly, cutting him off before he could continue. In that moment, as I stood there, watching Daniel's desperate attempts to explain himself, I realized something that had been brewing inside me for a while. The man who once promised to always protect me, Daniel, the one who said he would stand by me through anything, was no longer the same person. The man I thought I knew had changed. His face seemed to relax when he saw that I wasn't angry, but there was still a tension in his posture. He immediately offered to drive me home. I'm good. I don't need a lift. She, on the other hand, could use your help, shaking like a leaf. You better help her first, drive her home. I spoke with a tone of finality, not bothering to look at him again. The following days passed and I didn't contact Daniel. Instead, I focused on preparing everything for my wedding. The designer had sent me a message. asking me to come by during lunch to pick up the custom-made wedding dress. It was supposed to be for my engagement to Daniel, for that moment when he proposed. But fate had taken a different turn, and that moment, as fate would have it, as soon as I walked into the boutique, Grace followed closely behind me. She saw the gift box in my arms and gave me a haughty look, turning to the designer. "I want to try on that wedding dress." The designer replied politely, "I'm sorry, miss, but this dress was specifically made for the lady here. It's a custom-made order." Grace sneered. "A custom wedding dress, huh? You're acting like you're about to get married." At that moment, it seemed like she realized something and her face twisted with rage. "Wait, are you going to wear that dress and run to crash my wedding?" I rolled my eyes, uninterested in her outburst. "You've got something wrong with your head. You should get it treated. Don't come here and act crazy." With that, I turned to leave, holding the wedding dress box in my arms. But just as I moved, she lunged at me, grabbing the box from my hands. Before I could react, she ripped open the packaging and began violently tearing at the wedding dress. That wasn't enough. She ran to the counter, snatched a pair of scissors, and started cutting at the fabric. "Lenore, don't even think about ruining my wedding. I'll destroy your dress, and let's see how you try to sabotage my wedding then," she screamed, her voice shrill with fury. "Grace, are you insane?" I shouted, furious, as I tried to grab the dress back from her. In the chaos, the scissors grazed my arm and blood started seeping out. Grace froze, her eyes wide with shock. Then, after a long, tense pause, she too began slicing her own arm with the scissors, her face twisted in a manic expression. She collapsed onto the floor, softly sobbing, clearly out of control. I was stunned, unable to comprehend her erratic behavior. I hadn't even had the chance to speak when Daniel suddenly burst through the door, running towards the scene. His eyes immediately took in the scene. The dress shredded, Grace on the floor, and me standing there, bleeding, his face twisted with fury. "Lenore!" he roared, his voice filled with anger and disbelief. "What have you done?" His gaze softened as it shifted to Grace, and his expression filled with concern. He rushed to her side, carefully lifting her into his arms. Grace, ever the performer, played weak and coaxed Daniel. "Daniel, don't blame her. It's not her fault. She didn't mean to hurt me. It was an accident." "You think I'm going to believe it was an accident?" Daniel snapped, turning to me with venom in his voice. "If Grace is hurt because of you, Lenore, I swear I'll make you pay for this." As Daniel stormed out of the boutique with Grace in his arms, his steps were firm, decisive. Had he bothered to glance up, he would have noticed the security cameras capturing every moment of their heated encounter. The designer, fidgeting in her place, hesitated before speaking. "Miss McLaughlin, should I step in and explain the situation to him?" I managed a small, grateful smile. "That won't be necessary. It was better to end things this way. Sometimes it's better to leave things unsaid, to let the final threads of connection fray and fall away completely." Time flew by. Before I knew it, the day of my wedding had arrived. It was also the day I met my soon-to-be husband for the first time. Frederick Cortez was 1,000 times more handsome than Daniel. His strikingly refined features carried a certain aloofness, an unapproachable edge. But when his gaze fell on me, there was a softness, subtle yet unmistakable. In that moment, uncertainty feeling about the future crept in, clouding my thoughts. Frederick seemed to pick up on my hesitation. His voice was calm, steady as he said, "Don't worry, I've learned everything about this. Just do what I do and you'll be fine." With practiced ease, he guided me through the formalities, greeting his family, participating in the tea ceremony. His poise and grace put me at ease. He knew exactly how to handle every situation, never once making me feel uncomfortable. When it came time to get into the wedding car, his attentiveness continued. He made sure everything was in order, ensuring I was settled before stepping in himself. As the car's engine roared to life, the anxiety that had gripped my chest began to ease. Meanwhile, in another wedding car, Daniel couldn't hide his agitation. It was his wedding day, yet there had been no word from me, not a single message, no updates. His phone might as well have been glued to his hand as he scrolled and rechecked his notifications for what felt like the 100th time. Nothing. By the time he arrived at the hotel, the unease in his chest had grown unbearable. He scanned the bustling wedding venue, his mind racing. Turning to his groomsmen, he issued a firm order. Make sure Lenore doesn't show up here to cause trouble. His command was met with a stifled laugh from one of the groomsmen. Relax, Daniel, he said, grinning. Lenore's not coming to crash your wedding. She's busy with her own. She's getting married today, too. Right about now, she's probably in the middle of the ceremony at another hotel. Please download Novel Short from the Apple Store or Google Play and search for 283